Hey guys, Aaron Feeley, formerly of the Unsportsmanlike Conduct podcast, but just with life happening sometimes, moved to a different state, work change, all kinds of different things going down. The old show with Dal over on that channel dried up just a bit, unfortunately, so now kind of moving everything over to this channel, my own personal one going forward. This will be where we have our sports discussions, talk about things like that. I'll have some professional reels on here as well, but that'll probably be less to all of your focus, I'd have to imagine. Likely just going to go ahead and jump right into it here as we'll start off. How else would we do it but talking about the Chicago Bears, the three-time offseason champions. That's right, Kansas City. That's how you complete the three-peat right there. Shame it hasn't led to any actual regular season success the last 2 years, but third time is definitely the charm. I just know that. We're going to take a quick look at how things stand, what's coming up next, our predictions on that. Ryan Poles, the GM of the Bears, definitely came into this year a much more clear vision and direction for how he wanted to take the offseason. I definitely like the change of direction there from Chicago. Rather than just kind of spewing contracts in every given direction, a lot of what we call experimental signings the last few years, the DeMarcus Walkers, the guys like that were really more just Ryan Poles looking at some rotational guys with other teams with some upside. Not that we didn't do that again this season with one of our signings, but I definitely appreciated that it seems more like Ben Johnson, and we'll talk about that here in a second, has a specific focus in mind coming into this offseason. And we'll start with that. Obviously, the hiring of Ben Johnson to be the next head coach of the Chicago Bears. That was super exciting for all the Bears fans, except for the 6 of you that kind of just hang out on social media and constant frown on your face, complain about pretty much every move that takes place. Not really sure what's going on with that whole deal, but you know what, half the time they end up justified by the end of the season anyway. So, hey, but this time definitely a lot more league-wide buzz. Maybe the most highly coveted coaching candidate of any coaching cycle that I can remember. If anyone remembers the last time it felt like a hot coaching prospect was garnering nearly as much attention as Ben Johnson was for basically the last 3 years now, before finally deciding to leave Detroit and take the head coaching job right here in Chicago. Well, I'd like to hear who you think that would be. You can put that down in the comments, but I certainly can't remember anyone that generated this kind of circus that Ben Johnson did during the offseason. I mean, you got stories like Kevin Warren, the Bears president, saving the napkin that was sent to him when he went out for drinks with his wife, and a random Bears fan apparently sent him over some free drinks with a napkin that had a note written on it just saying, "Please hire Ben Johnson." And Kevin Warren went and saved that one. You had another Bears fan that was tracking Chicago airport flight logs and found a private plane was chartered from Pontiac, Michigan to the Chicago airport. And then later that day, Ben Johnson ended up being hired. So great work to the eagle-eyed fans tracking airport flight logs. I don't know that was the first time he did it. That would seem very coincidental, so I don't know if you were doing that all winter long, waiting for the Ben Johnson news, but certainly big-time excitement in Chicago in regards to the head coaching search, which ultimately landed on Ben Johnson. The Raiders were reportedly the front-runners there for a while, and then after Ben Johnson got hired by Chicago, they were talking about that was never really a thing, and Ben Johnson's agent went on and was taking interviews talking about how that was never even on the table. Ben never even liked the Raiders, and it was just kind of one of those rumors that they felt like was better to keep out there than to kill off right off the bat. So, hey, fair enough. Got him the big contract here in Chicago, and that's really where the offseason definitely took its turn. Obviously, then went right to work putting his staff together. Love the hire of Dennis Allen at defensive coordinator. He's been a terrific defensive mind in the NFL for so many years, especially on third down. Well-respected defensive mind across the league. You talk to all these coaches in the NFL, they all seem to really, really hold Dennis Allen in high regards as a defensive mind especially with his blitz packages. And again, just the things he can do to confuse an offensive coordinator, moving his players around, especially on the line. Getting guys that can play multiple line positions was big time for him. And I think pretty much led to a couple of their big signings that we'll get into here in a moment. That wasn't the end of the coaching hires either. They brought in Antoine Randall L., J.T. Barrett, both from Detroit. Eric Bieniemy going to come in and coach the running backs. Declan Doyle is our new offensive coordinator. He's somehow younger than I am. Jeez. But yeah, definitely a guy from the Sean Payton coaching tree. He's been coaching on a high level, D1 college, NFL, ever since he was 18. Got a lot of football knowledge, creativity. Ben Johnson said that he had heard from Sean Payton that this was the next Ben Johnson. And he said, quote, "And I hope to take that in a good way and bring him in here to Chicago." So Ben Johnson, obviously liking the hire of the youngster, said his age isn't going to be a factor. He's going to be well respected by the players and the coaches in this building. A lot of exciting hires for Chicago, and that's before we even get into the personnel changes. As we talk about the first wave of free agency and the trades from the week before, seals very, very strongly of a Ben Johnson effect. Last year, no secret, Bears' offensive line was a problem, particularly in the middle from guard to guard. And one day into free agency opening, the entire interior was replaced with Pro Bowl level talent, and in my opinion, in one case, Hall of Fame level talent, certainly at least All-Pro, multi-time All-Pro, guard in Joe Thuney. So we'll talk about him here after we mention the first trade that the Bears made last week. That was a 6th-round pick to the LA Rams. They get Jonah Jackson in return. Jackson had some issues in LA last year. To be fair, he battled injuries. They had him playing out of position. He was playing center for a little bit there for LA. He's more of a natural guard, and it really wasn't working. They had already promised him all that money, however. So when they signed him from Detroit, he had been a Pro Bowler up there playing in Ben Johnson's offense, but just didn't work out. Only played in 4 games last year for the Rams. A lot of money tied up in him. They got a lot of money that they need to get off the books. So the Bears said, hey, we'll take the cap hit for you. Here's a low draft pick. Some high risk, high reward type of a situation here for the Bears. If they are planning to start Jonah Jackson at guard, I mean, 4 games last year. They were burned by the injury bug, something fierce a year ago. Tevin Jenkins couldn't stay on the field for much of the season. And now they bring in Jonah Jackson, who's coming off of similar problems, so we'll see how that plays out. But obviously a guy who the last time he was playing for Ben Johnson, Pro Bowl season up in Detroit. So we'll see if Ben Johnson can get him back to that level of play again. Then later that same day, trading for Joe Thuney. That's really the big one. Guy who's won 4 Super Bowls, protecting Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes. He's played in 6 big games. He's a multi-time All-Pro, multi-time Pro Bowler, Hall of Fame quality guard who, unfortunately for Kansas City, they just couldn't afford to pay him. They've got Trey Smith there. They lock him up. They really had to make a decision there based on where they are against the cap. And fortunately for Chicago, that led to probably, in my opinion, the second best guard in the NFL right now, suddenly becoming available at a position the Bears desperately needed. He'll likely slide right into his natural position there at left guard, bring much-needed veteran leadership to that offensive line, and just a ridiculously high level of play as well. You could easily view this as similar to kind of what Khalil Mack was to our defense back in 2018. It was a good defense, solid. I think this line was set to be solid, maybe with a rookie in there, Jonah Jackson, and another free agent we'll talk about here in a moment. But you bring in a guy like Joe Thuney, it can really just flip that level of play. He's just so insanely what they need. Veteran leadership, been there, done that. He's won 4 Super Bowls, been to 6. We talked about that. Blocked for some of the greatest of all time, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, been an All-Pro, been a Pro Bowler, done all that, and he's still got quite a bit of good quality football left in him. I mean, he's just the level of guy that can raise the entire offensive line play by himself. And Chicago basically got him for what I'm going to call they got him for a 4th-round draft pick, but that's nothing for a guy at that level of play. honestly, he was just a cap casualty. Kansas City couldn't afford to pay everybody. They lose Joe Thuney, and that was kind of the theme for the Bears in this offseason. Jonah Jackson, obviously had the rough season in L.A., but for the most part, cap casualty, comes to Chicago. Joe Thuney, cap casualty, comes to Chicago. And then when free agency actually began, they managed to get the top center on the market, something I'm very excited about. Drew Dahlman comes here on a 3-year, $42 million contract. That might be the biggest one of all right there. He's 26 years old, at the biggest position of need that the Bears had coming into this free agency period, obviously already locking up the guards through those trades. Dahlman, a top 5 center in the NFL. He's played phenomenal football the last 2 years. He's been graded in the top 5 for centers back-to-back consecutive years down in Atlanta. But again, Falcons really battling the cap. They're in negative cap space right now. They couldn't afford to bring him back. They've got a lot invested in their offensive line already. And once again, the Bears, the benefactors of that. Dahlman very much in the Olin Kreutz mold of center, very athletic, second-level attacking type of a center, quick to transition from his initial block to get to that next level, attack the linebackers in the run game. Slightly worse in the pass game, but still well above average, should only improve as well. He's still a very young player, graded out very nicely on PFF for both run blocking and pass blocking. Again, elite run blocker, above average pass blocker, but I mean, based on what the Bears have had, the just swinging door of centers that they've had since Kreutz retired, actually left us to go down to New Orleans, played for the Saints for a little bit, but it's just been it's been a bit of a circus at that position. Cody Whitehair, the last one that was graded out above average for the full season for Chicago, and that was back in 2016. It was actually his Pro Bowl year in 2016. And so the Bears attack the offensive line. I think that definitely tells me that Ben Johnson came in, looked at this offense, identified what needed to be addressed, looked at that offensive line and said, all right, listen, this is going to have to be something that we attack early and often. My offense, I'm going to need to get more athletic there in the middle. Ben Johnson, he loves to run the football to set up his passing game. Had the two-headed monster at tailback in Detroit, but they had some athletic, road-grading guards up in Detroit, and then obviously, of course, that right tackle. In Ben Johnson's own words, saying that he was very excited about the Bears' job because they had Darnell Wright, who he viewed as very much in the mold of a Penei Sewell, to be that attacking right tackle to really get the run game going, and now they've got the interior built up as well. And now really all that remains to be seen is how comfortable they are with Braxton Jones at left tackle going forward on that offensive line. We're going to describe it as adequate. Adequate at the left tackle position is Braxton Jones. So certainly good enough to get him through this season, and we'll see if that is good enough in Ben Johnson's and Ryan Poles' eyes to keep him in that starting position for at least one more year, or if maybe they attack the offensive line at pick 10. There's a lot of things they can do there at pick number 10. We might talk about that in a later video. But then also in free agency, they go out and they pick up Dayo Odengbo. Sign him for 3 years, $16 million per year. I'm going to call this one cautiously optimistic. It's an upside signing. I talked about that earlier. To be entirely frank with you, he's a guy that's gotten great pressure rates. He's been a rotational pass rusher for Indianapolis the last 4 years. Last year they asked him to move inside. They played defensive tackle for most of the year. It definitely dipped his numbers a bit, just 3 sacks on the season after he had 8 the year before and 6.5 the year before that. But that's the thing. I'm not overly just enthusiastic about it. Great upside is the selling point. Then we'll stick with that. He was a rotational piece, not really a proven history of lining up every down and just dominating the guy across from him. Hasn't put up phenomenal sack numbers, but he's put up efficiency numbers. He's proven to be very athletic. That was kind of his thing coming out of college even. He was a great athlete, great prospect, and we'll see now as he comes to Chicago. Dennis Allen has his fingerprints all over this signing. He loves that body mold for his defensive ends, very similar to Cam Jordan, actually. And we'll see if Dennis Allen can work somewhat similar magic with Dio Adangbo as he was able to with those Saints defensive ends. And obviously across from Montez Sweat, that doesn't hurt. Nor does the much, much, much bigger signing for Chicago on the defensive line. They go out and they get Grady Jarrett, who was cut just about like an hour or two earlier by the Atlanta Falcons. Another one of those we just ran out of money guys for Atlanta. Grady Jarrett, multi-time Pro Bowler down there, a guy that's still got a lot of juice left. I mean, he really popped off, especially you go back, you watch that Pittsburgh game down in Atlanta last year. Grady Jarrett was making Justin Fields very uncomfortable, and Justin Fields, obviously I'm a Bears fan, watched him for the first 3-4 years of his career, and not an easy guy to sack. Grady Jarrett was putting the pressure all over him in that game. Grady Jarrett, phenomenal against the run as well, and maybe most importantly of all, only 31 years old, but a guy that has some juice left in the tank. He's going to come here, play at a Pro Bowl type level for the Bears at defensive tackle, but also brings a whole girth of experience with him. Again, veteran leadership. They go out, they get Joe Thuney for the offensive line. Now they've got a guy like Grady Jarrett for their defensive line to kind of fill that same role on the other side of the ball. Bears absolutely attack the trenches in free agency. I love it. Other than the Dio Adangbo signing, I'm a little iffy on that one. Little bit on the iffier side, but we'll see how that plays out as the season and the next two seasons kind of do their thing. And perhaps he still fills the same role here as he did in Indianapolis. I mean, there's no guarantee that they signed him to automatically be the starter, and there's a couple of options they could go with there. Obviously, you're picking at pick 10, and not only that, they got 2 second-round picks, they got a third-round pick. They've got 4 picks in the top 75 of this draft in a deep pass-rushing defensive end draft. Definitely something that they could go for there. And here's the other big one is I still don't think that they're out on Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson from Cincinnati was given permission to go seek a trade. Back-to-back seasons with over 17 sacks for the Bengals. I mean, you're talking about a premier pass rusher. And these rumors we're hearing that it might only take a high third or a second-round pick. Courtney Cronin of ESPN 1000 and Ben Devine, both hinting that they believe that the Bears are definitely still at the very least entertaining phone calls with Cincinnati to talk about possibly bringing in Trey Hendrickson, who would once again be one of those guys that the Bengals just, they're trying to negotiate with T. Higgins. They're trying to negotiate with Jamar Chase. They already publicly stated they're going to try to make Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. And then Myles Garrett went out there and blew up the non-quarterback market with that contract he just signed in Cleveland. And we'll see if Cincinnati keeps to their word and still has to go out and figure out how to give Jamar Chase at least that much. They just have too much money tied up in other places. Had to tell Trey Hendrickson, listen, you might be the best pure pass rusher over the last 2 seasons in the league, but we just don't have the money for it. And they give him permission, go out, seek a trade. Bears definitely one of the teams that are in the mix, talking to him. We'll see what it costs them. There's been some indications, maybe a first-round pick swap. Cincinnati moves up from 17 to 10, plus maybe a middle-round pick, maybe the 4th round thrown in there as well. Might be enough to get Trey Hendrickson here. There's some Bears fans that they don't want to do it. They'd rather keep the cap space and the draft picks. Personally, I think resources can only get you so much. We've had resources for years now. Eventually, you have to turn resources into great players, into productive players. Who's been more productive from the defensive end position over the last 2 seasons than Trey Hendrickson? I mean, that's what you want to gather resources for, is to go out and turn them into someone like Trey Hendrickson, who might be able to come in here, get you another 15-plus sack season here in Chicago. That would be excellent. Suddenly you're talking about one of the most dynamic front four rotations in the entire NFL. You're talking about a Philadelphia Eagles, possibly, quality of defensive line there with Montez Sweat, Dio Adangbo. You could have Trey Hendrickson, and then in the middle, you got Javon Dexter, you got Andrew Billings, you got Grady Jarrett coming in here. It would be a nightmare for some opposing quarterbacks all season if the Bears were able to get that done. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Would you rather have the resources going forward? Would you rather just keep our picks and our money? How would you feel about going out and trading for a Trey Hendrickson? I'd love to hear some more Bears fans' opinions on that. And I'm also going to be talking about plenty other things in the world of sports. It's not going to be Chicago exclusive, so let me know what you want me to talk about next. Any other teams you want me to focus in on, give you my opinion on their offseason thus far, maybe some film breakdowns. Love to hear some suggestions in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you guys.